is that abortions happen in rare instances. You see, with the way the world is liberalizing, abortion does not necessarily happen in rare instances, but that's not very important in today's debate. But very crucially, he says that the comparative is the fact that the woman is going to face one psychological trauma, is going to face shame from her family, and all that bullshit. But we say there's a clash here. There's a clash of the psychological trauma that the woman faces versus the right to life of an entity, the right to life of a child. So we say, assuming that this is the comparative, we will preference the right to life of a child, the right to life of another human being over whatever psychological trauma that you face. We say, secondly, that in this instance, there is a dual ownership of that particular child. That the man owns 50, that there's 50% ownership of the child. The woman has a 50% right to the child, and the man has a 50% right to the child. I'll explain how this is very important later on in today's debate. So even if you are facing any psychological trauma, the reality is that the property or the entity is not completely yours. It also, like, proportionately belongs to the man. So no matter the psychological trauma you face, we think that there's that proportionate ownership. Thirdly, we say it is a lie to say that all women who commit abortion because of psychological problems that they face. Most women don't do it because they want to continue living reckless life. We don't have to assume that all women who commit abortion do that for the reason of that psychological trauma and shame. Kumbi asked Appeal and said, with all these factors not existing, medical complications, psychological trauma and shame, what is the principle that they have? You can see that this side is like particularly principally bankrupt. Then they say that surrogacy means subordinacy. We think very crucially that surrogacy does not particularly mean like subordinacy in this particular instance. It means very crucially that you are just going to bear the child and hand it over the man. The principle here is that you are not going to have any particular connection with that particular child. That means that the argument it gives to you about the woman facing the psychological trauma of seeing her child every day is not going to exist. Because as soon as you give birth to the child, the principle of surrogacy is you hand it over to the man, and the man becomes the owner of that particular child. So you're not going to have contact with the child. You're not going to face the trauma, like he says, of seeing the child every day and hating the mistake that you made in your life. You're going to hand over the child and ownership of that child fully to the man, and in that particular instance. Then he says that moral agency only exists so far as you are giving birth to. We say moral agency doesn't work that way. Moral agency exists insofar as there is life, and we think that there is life from the stage of formation. That a fetus has life, and life is what determines moral agency. If he says that a baby only has life when he leaves the womb, then we agree with him. But insofar as a fetus can have life inside the womb, then we say moral agency should be dependent on life and not what these guys tell us. Then the whole argument of social capital is not important, because ultimately you may have instances where there is proportionate social capital between these two people. You don't think that's a very a good argument. I'm going to be giving. I'll take your eyes whatever you raise them. I'm going to be bringing two analytical extensions. First, you should ask yourself this question: is abortion something that is good and should be incentivized in society? From OG, we say abortions are abhorrent. That they are something that we should not incentivize in society. We support choice, we support agency of women, but we think that it is very pernicious insofar as it comes at the cost of human life in society. If we admit in today's debate that abortion is not all that nice, it's not something that is particularly good, particularly something that should be encouraged in society, then we have to get this policy. And then that particularly means that we have an obligation to bring abortion to the barest minimum. So if you have any, if it is an instance where you say you do not have the viability to take up the child, some states can give you concession and say commit abortion. But in this instance, the man is willing to take full care of the viability of the child. He's willing to take care of the child. Then what is the reason for us, for us to promote abortion in this particular instance? Which is abortions firstly are things that are abhorrent, are things that we should not particularly encourage in our societies. Now, we think very crucially that bodily autonomy as a concept is something that is very arbitrary. Why do we say so? Because you have made the choice to have unprotected sex in that particular instance, and if the consequence of your choice is pregnancy, then you have to bear that cost. You understand the impact of this argument. You understand that these guys can come and say, oh, but when you take excessive sugar in society and you destroy some of your organs, like your kidney, you are allowed to remove that kidney. But the difference in this particular instance is that there is a complication in this instance, and that complication is the existence of another life. So if it is just you taking out your kidney, you making a mistake, and you must not bear the consequence for all your mistakes. You might be careless and maybe like destroy, break a knee, but you have an obligation to correct that. But there's a particular complication that means that you cannot just, you have to bear the consequences of your actions. The fact that another life has been created is one that is very, very crucial, very, very important. Why is this argument particularly important? Because once the fetus has been formed, he has a moral agency. He is an entity just like you, meaning that the fetus has the rights, all the rights that you have as an individual, meaning he has the right to life and also the right to bodily autonomy the same way that you have. We think that insofar as the fetus exists and has life, then he also has the same right to bodily autonomy over you, the parent. So why should we preference the right to bodily autonomy of the parent over the right to life and the right to bodily autonomy of the child himself? We think insofar as the child is an entity, insofar as he has been formed and has life, he has proportionate rights with his parents, and that is why this argument of the arbitrariness of bodily autonomy is particularly important in today's debate. Any QIs? Okay. Now, second argument, the father's right to the child. We think very crucially that sex is between two people who consent. Then, the child's formation is also as a result of a proportionate contribution. I don't need to explain the process of sex, but we know that the man has to bring sperm and the woman has to have the sperm in her ovary for a child to be born. Meaning that there's a proportionate contribution in that particular. Before I go on, I'll take you.
Yes. It was how consent to sex amounts to consent to carry the pregnancy.
Sit. You know the fact is, you know about the complications of your actions. If you know that when you have sex, there's a possibility of pregnancy, then you should take steps to mitigate that. If the consequences come, then you have to bear them, like I've told you, because there's a complication which is the life that exists. Why is the argument about the right to ownership of the child important? Because because there's a 50-50 ownership of the entity by both parties. The father and the child have 50-50 ownership. Why is this important? If one party decides that they do not want that entity again, when two parties have 50-50 ownership, when one party decides that they do not want that entity again, they are not allowed to destroy that property or throw it away. You have to return it to the person who wants that particular property in that particular instance. The party who doesn't want that entity cannot destroy it or sell it, but return it to the person who wants to keep it. In this case, you happen to bear the burden of keeping that property for 9 months until the transfer is complete. We think that is something that is comparative. If two of us own a car, if Kumbi and I own a car and we contributed 50-50 to buy that car, and he says he doesn't want that car anymore, he can't go and destroy that car. The reasonable thing to do is to give me that car, transfer it to me. Even if he has to park that car in his garage for 9 months, we think he has to do that. He doesn't have any right to destroy that car because it is not his, it is both of his.